Pompeii's shocking discovery. Ancient Rome's male gladiators had open, gay love affairs. You wake to the smell of blood and leather, and for a moment, you forget which fight left the bruises blooming across your ribs. The stone wall beside your head is cool, carved with words you didn't write but recognize instantly. Your name, scratched beside another man's, enclosed in what can only be called a declaration. Outside your cell, Pompeii is stirring under a September sun that doesn't know it has exactly 1 year left to shine. You are Celadus, and the graffiti covering these barracks walls will survive longer than the city itself, preserving a truth that will make Victorian archaeologists literally wall off entire rooms rather than let the public see what you and your brothers-in-arms truly were to each other. Before we descend into those ash-preserved chambers, I'm genuinely curious. Where in the world are you right now? It's remarkable that a story carved into stone 2,000 years ago can reach from Pompeii to wherever you're listening today. That connection across time is exactly why these walls matter. The discovery happened in 1767, when excavators working through 17 feet of volcanic debris uncovered the gladiator barracks of ancient Pompeii. What they found wasn't just weapons and armor. It was an entire archive of desire, etched into plaster and stone by men who killed for crowds by day and loved each other by night. The inscriptions were so explicit, so undeniable in their romantic and sexual content between male gladiators, that the site was immediately restricted. For over 2 centuries, scholars translated selectively, published partially, and explained away what the walls were screaming: that Rome's ultimate symbols of masculinity, oiled, muscled warriors who embodied violence itself, were openly, unambiguously involved with other men. Not hidden, not condemned, celebrated. This wasn't some peripheral detail of gladiatorial life. It was woven into the very identity of what it meant to be desirable, powerful, and masculine in ancient Rome. The same culture that built an empire on military conquest also carved Celadus makes the girls sigh and the boys dream into a fighter's cell wall, using Latin so explicit there's no room for metaphorical interpretation. These weren't modern projections or wishful readings. They were advertisements, love letters, territorial markings, and poetry, all preserved by the same volcanic catastrophe that froze Pompeii in time. The barracks formed a quadrangle around a central training ground, housing anywhere from 80 to 100 gladiators in cells barely larger than modern prison bunks. The graffiti density is staggering. Nearly every surface carries some inscription, and roughly 30% involves romantic or sexual content. Of that, close to half references same-sex encounters, desires, or relationships. Dr. Lorenzo Fergola's excavation work since the 1990s has documented inscriptions that range from crude to tender, from boastful to heartbroken. Celadus the Thracian, Pearl of the Girls, Glory of the Boys, appears in Cell 14. 2 doors down, Crescens the net fighter holds the hearts of all the boys. Not some, not many, but all, written with the confidence of a man who had evidence to back it up. But here's what shifts this from historical curiosity to profound revelation. These men were slaves. They were property, owned by wealthy Romans, forced to fight and potentially die for entertainment. Yet within that brutal framework, they possessed something approaching agency in their intimate lives. The walls document not just fleeting encounters but sustained relationships, jealousies, negotiations. Mansuetus loves Celadus, who does not return his feelings. Venus has pierced my heart, but Celadus remains stone. That's rejection, documented for eternity, the kind of emotional specificity that only comes from real human drama. The barracks also contained paired burials, gladiators interred together with interlaced hands, their epitaphs sometimes noting they were brothers in arms who shared in death the cell they shared in life. The Latin is deliberately ambiguous, the way language often becomes when describing relationships that don't fit neat categories. But physical evidence doesn't lie. Bronze medallions depicting two male figures embracing, mirrors inscribed, "So he can see himself as I see him." Perfect. Personal grooming items, tweezers, oils, razors, suggesting a culture of male beauty that contradicts every modern stereotype about ancient masculinity being synonymous with brutishness. One inscription reads, "If I die tomorrow, tell Crescens he was my last thought." It's carved in cell 8, dated to within months of a scheduled fight against a veteran from Capua. The writer survived. We know because a second inscription appears below it in different handwriting. "Don't you dare die. Who else would put up with your snoring?" It's Crescens responding, turning terror into tenderness with humor. These weren't just fighters. They were partners navigating the constant proximity of death together, using whatever emotional tools they had, and those tools included love. The training ground itself tells stories, where patterns analyzed by Dr. Alison Cooley show that certain secluded alcoves, tactically useless for combat practice, saw extensive nighttime use based on oil lamp residue. Corners that would be terrible for sword work became spaces for something else entirely. The archaeology doesn't just suggest intimacy, it maps where and when it happened, revealing a parallel geography of desire operating alongside the official architecture of violence. What makes this so historically significant is how it demolishes the modern myth that ancient attitudes toward sexuality were identical to contemporary ones. Rome didn't have words for gay or straight or bisexual because those categories didn't exist in their conceptual universe. Sexual behavior was understood through frameworks of dominance and submission, active and passive roles, but not through gender of partner as a defining characteristic of identity. A gladiator who attracted both men and women wasn't considered conflicted or closeted. He was considered irresistible. His desirability to all genders proved his power, his charisma, his fundamental worthiness. This is where the historical record gets complicated in fascinating ways. Romans absolutely had hierarchies around sexual behavior. Freeborn citizens penetrating others was acceptable. Being penetrated could carry shame depending on status. But gladiators existed in a liminal space. They were technically infames, people without legal standing, which paradoxically gave them social freedom. They couldn't hold office or testify in court, but they also weren't bound by the same sexual propriety expected of senators. They were celebrities, sex symbols, and outcasts simultaneously. The graffiti reflects this. Wealthy patrons of both genders paid for access, leaving inscriptions like, "Your admirer watches from the stands. Look for the blue cloak after tomorrow's victory." The economic dimension is equally revealing. Wax tablets recovered from the barracks show payment records. Private performance for senator's wife, 200 sesterces, sits beside entertainment at Quintus's birthday, 500 sesterces, combat demonstration and additional services. Male patrons consistently paid more, possibly for discretion, possibly because wealthy Roman men were simply worse at negotiating when attractive gladiators were involved. One inscription documents what amounts to a financial partnership. Crescens and Salatus share all earnings witnessed by Mars and Venus. That's not just a business arrangement, it's a domestic contract, invoking gods of both war and love, creating something recognizable as a committed relationship within the constraints of their world. The night before major games, the preparation chambers beneath the arena filled with a specific kind of tension. Inscriptions there are different, rawer, more desperate. Mars, let me survive to see his face again, was initially interpreted as a man thinking of a wife. Cross-referencing revealed his referred to Antonius, another gladiator whose cell contained reciprocal prayers. They were lovers praying to survive for each other, which is simultaneously devastating and beautiful, like finding ancient versions of letters soldiers write before battle, except these were men fighting for entertainment, and the person they most wanted to return to was waiting 2 cells away. Dr. Kathleen Coleman's research into gladiator culture notes that emotional bonds between fighters who paired in the arena created tactical advantages. Men fought harder, smarter, more cohesively when protecting someone they loved. Evolution doesn't care about the gender of your beloved, it cares that you'll take a blade meant for them. Crescens and Celadus fought as a team in staged combats, their synchronized movements documented in spectator graffiti. That net and sword move in the third round was either rehearsed or proof of soulmates. Partnership in violence became indistinguishable from partnership in life. But this wasn't some egalitarian paradise. The graffiti also documents jealousy, betrayal, hierarchy. Lucius Aurelius has purchased Pardus from the ludus. They retire to his villa, appears with angry scratch marks from presumably rejected suitors. These were still men in chains, still slaves whose bodies and lives belonged to others. The freedom to love didn't erase the fundamental unfreedom of their existence. Some inscriptions are transactional. Pardus, the Cimmerian, now under protection of Lucilius. All debts paid, freedom promised. That's patronage, prostitution, or genuine affection, possibly all three simultaneously, because human relationships resist clean categorization, especially under systems of enslavement. The most haunting artifacts are the small ones. A bronze mirror wrapped in cloth, found in cell 14. A jet wolf head, carved as a love token, discovered in debris near cell 9. Dice with erotic imagery depicting male couples, used for games the night before fights. These objects were held, valued, kept close by men who owned almost nothing. They represent choice within choicelessness, the insistence on beauty and connection even when death waited in the sand. When Vesuvius erupted on October 24, 79 CE, the positions of bodies told final stories. In one cell, two skeletons embraced, arms interlaced, positioned in a way that was clearly deliberate. They chose to die together rather than separately. Analysis of bone wear patterns confirmed both were gladiators. The graffiti in that cell included Thrax and Marcus, united forever. Forever became literally true, their embrace preserved in volcanic ash for 2,000 years. Another pair was found with the smaller man's head cradled against the larger one's chest, seeking or offering comfort as the world ended in fire and darkness. Celadus himself disappears from the historical record in late 78 CE. No body matching his description was found in the barracks during excavation. Some historians speculate he won freedom in that final year, or was sold to another ludus. Others prefer to imagine he and Crescens escaped before the eruption, buying their freedom with accumulated earnings and vanishing into history's gaps. There's no evidence for it, but there's no evidence against it either, and sometimes history needs its ambiguous endings, the possibility of happiness that can't be disproven. What we know for certain is that their legacy survived in those walls. When Victorian archaeologists first uncovered the barracks in the 1860s, they were so scandalized they literally built barriers to hide certain inscriptions. Giuseppe Fiorelli's private journals describe the graffiti as of such a nature that they cannot be shared with the public without causing moral outrage. He was talking about declarations of love between men who killed for a living, expressions of desire between warriors, preserved in first-person accounts more reliable than any ancient historian's interpretation. The Victorians, who considered table legs sexually provocative, couldn't handle gladiators in love. It wasn't until the late 20th century that comprehensive translation began. Dr. Antonio Verone's 2001 study finally cataloged the full scope of relationships documented in the barracks. The academic reaction was essentially, "Oh, wow, how did we miss this?" The answer, obviously, is that they didn't miss it, they ignored it, covered it, explained it away. For over a century, scholars performed mental gymnastics to avoid concluding that gladiators loved men, insisting inscriptions describing explicit physical acts were metaphorical, or that men buried embracing were just close friends. Today, the barracks tell their full story to millions of annual visitors. Tour guides point out love notes between gladiators with the same matter-of-fact tone used for mosaics or bathhouses, because that's what it was to the people who lived there. Unremarkable, except in intensity. Modern technology continues revealing hidden inscriptions. Multispectral imaging in 2019 uncovered, "Here trained Celadus, who conquered hearts as easily as opponents." Below it, different handwriting. Confirmed. Source, "My conquered heart." What does this discovery mean for how we understand ancient masculinity? It explodes the myth that warriors have always been exclusively heterosexual, that masculine cultures inherently reject same-sex desire, that acceptance of LGBTQ+ people is some modern invention. The gladiators of Pompeii were the peak of Roman masculine ideals, violent, dangerous, admired, desired by crowds, and they loved men openly. Their society didn't see this as contradictory. If anything, being attractive to everyone proved superior virility. Limiting yourself to one gender would have been like being so good at combat you only used one weapon, unnecessarily restrictive. This challenges contemporary assumptions about what natural masculinity looks like. The idea that real men don't show emotion, don't form deep bonds, don't express vulnerability? Tell that to the gladiator who carved "Crescens, if I survive today, meet me at midnight," into his cell wall before walking into an arena where he might die. Tell that to Mansuetus, who documented his unrequited love for Celadus with poetry etched in stone. Tell that to Thrax and Marcus, who chose to face oblivion in each other's arms rather than alone. The walls of Pompeii refuse to cooperate with our simplifications. They insist on complexity, on the messy reality of human experience across time. These men were warriors and lovers, slaves and celebrities, brutal and tender, violent and affectionate. They contain multitudes, as did their society when we look closely enough. They remind us that LGBTQ+ people didn't suddenly appear in the 20th century, created by modernity or social movements. We've always existed. We loved, fought, carved our hearts into stone walls that would outlast empires. The final inscription attributed to Celadus, carved sometime before he vanished from history, reads simply, "Celadus lived, loved, fought. That is enough." 2,000 years later, with those words still visible beneath ash and earth, it still is. His story, their stories, survived not in spite of their loves but because of them, preserved by men who insisted on documenting their hearts alongside their victories, who refused to let desire be erased even by death itself. The ash that buried Pompeii created a time capsule of honesty. It captured relationships that would have been edited out of formal histories, expressions of love that didn't fit the narratives empires tell about themselves. It preserved the truth that masculinity has never been singular, that warriors have always loved in ways that transcend modern categories, that the human heart's complexity has remained constant even as empires rise and fall. Somewhere beneath that September sun in 78 CE, in a barracks that smelled of sweat and leather and life, Celadus may have looked at words carved into his wall, declarations from admirers of all genders, love notes from Crescens, poetry from strangers, and understood something profound. That desire makes us immortal in ways violence never can. Swords rust, armor crumbles, victories fade to legend, reduced to footnotes in dusty chronicles that no one reads. But love, scratched into stone with enough conviction, with enough desperate hope, survives the fire that consumes cities. It waits under ash and earth, patient as only truth can be, for hands that will lift it back into light, for eyes that will read and recognize themselves in words written by warriors who loved without apology, who fought without shame, who carved their truth into stone and dared the future to look away. 2,000 years later, we haven't. We can't. Because what they left behind isn't just archaeology, it's testimony. Living, breathing proof that hearts have always beaten the same across centuries, that the ache of unrequited love felt identical in 78 CE as it does today, that jealousy and devotion and tender humor between lovers transcends the gulf of millennia. Love has always found ways to persist, to announce itself even in the most unlikely places. In cells built for killers, on walls that witnessed both brutal training and gentle intimacy, in the space between violence and vulnerability that these men navigated every single day. Even men trained for death, men who understood mortality with an intimacy most of us will never know, chose again and again to celebrate life in all its complicated, messy, beautiful, undeniable humanity. They could have spent their brief lives hardening themselves against feeling, building walls around their hearts to match the stone around their cells. Instead, they opened themselves to connection, risking emotional pain in addition to physical, insisting that even borrowed time deserved to be filled with meaning. They wrote love letters knowing they might not survive to see them answered. They made promises to meet at midnight knowing dawn might never come. They carved each other's names with the same hands that held weapons, transforming instruments of death into tools of devotion. And in doing so, they left us something more valuable than any treasure buried in Pompeii's ruins, evidence that we have always been here, have always loved, have always mattered, that our stories are as ancient as civilization itself,